Imagine waking up one morning, a perfectly normal Tuesday, and being told that everything you know about yourself is a lie. Your name, your past, your childhood, all of it, a carefully constructed fiction, a prison built not out of walls and iron bars, but out of silence, secrets, and the love of the one person you trusted most. Now imagine this wasn't a movie, wasn't a thriller novel, wasn't some dark dream you wake up sweating from at 3 in the morning. Imagine this was your life. For one woman in Florida, this was her reality. On a quiet autumn morning in 2025, 2 law enforcement officers knocked on her door. She was a grown woman in her 40s, living a quiet life. She thought they were there about something routine, maybe a neighbor's complaint, maybe paperwork. She wasn't worried, until they said the words she had never, in her entire life, heard before. "We believe you are Michelle Marie Newton. You were reported missing in 1983. Your father has been looking for you for 42 years. 42 years. The woman stood there, in her doorway, staring at 2 officers who were now waiting for her to say something, anything. But what do you say to that? How do you respond when the ground beneath you opens up and swallows everything you thought was real? She had a name, she had memories, she had a life. But apparently, she also had a father who had spent over 4 decades searching for a little girl who had simply vanished. And the most devastating part of this entire story, she had no idea.
Welcome to Hidden Chronicle, a channel dedicated to uncovering the truth behind mysterious disappearances and real-life stories that the world refuses to forget. Here, we explore missing person cases, solved mysteries, and unsolved investigations from around the world. Some stories finally find answers after years, while others remain haunting puzzles waiting to be solved. Our goal is simple: to keep these stories alive, spread awareness, and search for the truth together. If you're fascinated by real mysteries and powerful true stories, make sure to subscribe to Hidden Chronicle, like the videos, share them with others, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps bring more attention to these cases and keeps the conversation going. Thank you for being part of the Hidden Chronicle community, where every story matters and every clue counts.
To understand what happened on that autumn morning in 2025, we need to go back, way back, to a small house in Louisville, Kentucky, to the year 1979, to a young couple who were, by all appearances, just trying to build a life. Joseph Newton was a working man, steady, quiet, deeply committed to his family. His wife, Deborah Newton, was the mother of their daughter, a bright-eyed little girl born on October 5, 1979. They named her Michelle Marie Newton. By most accounts, Michelle's early years were ordinary, a toddler learning to walk on the linoleum floors of a Kentucky home, a little girl with her whole future ahead of her. Photos from that time show a child with an easy smile, the kind of smile that makes a father's chest feel full to bursting. But behind the walls of that house, the marriage was fracturing. Quietly, slowly, the way most marriages do when they fall apart, not all at once, but piece by piece, like a mirror cracking in slow motion. By 1983, things had gotten bad enough that separation seemed inevitable. Joseph and Deborah were no longer partners. They were strangers living under the same roof, bound together only by a 3-year-old girl who had no idea her world was about to be torn in half. And then, one day in 1983, Deborah made a suggestion. She wanted to take Michelle on a trip to Georgia, just a short visit. Family, she said. She'd be back soon. Joseph agreed. He trusted her. Whatever was broken between them as a couple, they were still both parents. He would never have believed, could never have imagined, that the next time he would see his daughter would be 42 years later. Because Deborah Newton never came back. The days passed, then a week. Joseph waited. He called. No answer. He drove to the address in Georgia that Deborah had mentioned. No one was there. Neighbors hadn't seen anyone matching their description. A cold dread began to settle into his bones, the kind of fear that parents never forget once it arrives. He went to the police. This was 1983. There was no internet. There was no national Amber Alert system. There were no social media platforms where you could share a missing child's photo and reach millions of people in seconds. There was just Joseph Newton, a desperate father, walking into a police station and trying to explain that his ex-wife had taken his daughter and vanished. The authorities took his report. They opened an investigation. Deborah Newton was charged with felony custodial interference, a serious crime. Her name went into the system. Warrants were issued. But Deborah was already gone. She had planned this. Whatever she had told Joseph about Georgia was a distraction, a misdirection. She wasn't heading to Georgia for a family visit. She was running. She had created a new identity, given Michelle a new name, settled somewhere no one knew them, and from that point forward, little Michelle Marie Newton, as far as the world was concerned, simply ceased to exist. She was 3 years old. 3 years old, and she had already been erased. Joseph Newton did not stop looking. Let me say that again, because I want you to feel the weight of those words. He did not stop. Not after 1 year, not after 5, not after a decade had passed, and his little girl, wherever she was, had grown from a toddler into a teenager. He kept going. Over the years, the case technically went cold. In the year 2000, 17 years after Michelle disappeared, the case was dismissed from active investigation. In 2005, Michelle's name was removed from the National Missing Children's databases. From the system's perspective, this case was over. But for Joseph, it was never over. He petitioned, he called, he wrote letters, he kept his daughter's name alive in any way he could. A family member, unwilling to let the case die, pushed for it to be reopened in 2016. And finally, the case was active again, after 33 years. Think about what Joseph went through during those decades. Think about the milestones he missed. First day of school, first bicycle, teenage birthdays, high school graduation. He missed all of it, every single moment, stolen from him by a woman who decided one day that he didn't deserve to be a father. And Michelle, wherever she was, missed him too, even if she didn't know she was missing him, even if she didn't know he existed, even if she had grown up believing a different story entirely. There is a particular kind of grief that comes from losing someone who is still alive, who is somewhere out there in the world, breathing, eating, sleeping, laughing, completely unaware that someone, somewhere, is aching for them every single day. Joseph Newton knew that grief intimately for 42 years. The reinvestigation that began in 2016 was painstaking work. Detectives and investigators from Jefferson County, Kentucky began re-examining everything from the original case. Old witness statements, old addresses, old leads that had gone nowhere in the 1980s and 1990s. Here's what they knew. Deborah Newton was smart. Whatever she had done to disappear, she had done it well enough to stay hidden for over 3 decades. That kind of sustained invisibility doesn't happen by accident. It takes planning, it takes discipline, it takes the willingness to abandon your old life completely, your name, your identity, your connections to anyone who might recognize you. Investigators believed that at some point after fleeing with Michelle, Deborah adopted an entirely new identity. She became someone else, someone with a different name, different documents, a different history. And she raised Michelle under that same false identity, making sure the little girl grew up never knowing the truth about who she really was. For Michelle, this would have felt completely normal. Children accept the world as it is presented to them. If your mother tells you your name is Sharon, then your name is Sharon. If she tells you your father is gone, then your father is gone. Children don't demand proof. They trust. Deborah exploited that trust completely. As the years passed and the case remained unsolved, Deborah apparently relaxed. By the time investigators were closing in, she was living in Florida, in a retirement community of all places. A quiet woman, elderly now, known to her neighbors as a polite, unassuming lady who liked to walk her dog in the mornings. No one suspected a thing, because no one knew who she really was. But someone, somewhere, knew something. And in the world of modern law enforcement, it only takes one tip to break open a case that has been frozen for 4 decades. It was a Crime Stoppers tip that cracked the case open. The details of exactly who made the call and what they knew have not been fully revealed publicly. Law enforcement agencies protect their sources carefully, especially in cases like this, where the information proved to be the decisive key. But someone, somewhere, reached out. Someone who knew something about a woman living in Florida under a name that wasn't hers. Investigators received the tip and began working it carefully. They couldn't afford to move too fast. If Deborah realized she was being watched, she might run again. She had done it once before. She had spent 42 years being careful. One false move by law enforcement and she could vanish again, and this time, perhaps forever. So, they watched. They gathered information. They confirmed details. Piece by piece, the picture came together. The woman living in Florida as Sharon Neely was, investigators believed, Deborah Newton. Same general age, consistent timeline, and she was living with a grown daughter, a woman in her 40s. A woman who, investigators believed, was Michelle Marie Newton. Now came the most delicate part of the entire operation. Not the arrest of Deborah, not the legal proceedings, but the moment when they would have to walk up to a grown woman who had lived her entire life believing she was someone else and tell her the truth. How do you prepare someone for that? How do you soften a blow that is, by its very nature, impossible to soften? The answer is, you can't. You just have to tell them, and then you have to be there when the world falls apart. Before any confrontation could happen, investigators needed to be absolutely certain. In a case this sensitive, with this much at stake emotionally for everyone involved, they could not afford to be wrong. They ran DNA analysis. Modern forensic DNA technology is extraordinary. Where investigators in the 1980s had only photographs and eyewitness accounts, today's detectives can compare genetic material with a precision that was unimaginable 40 years ago. They had DNA samples connected to the Newton family. They obtained a DNA sample from the woman they believed was Michelle. The result came back, 99.9% match. This was her. This was Michelle Marie Newton. The little girl who had disappeared from Louisville, Kentucky in 1983 was alive and well and living in Florida, and she had spent her entire adult life not knowing her own name. On November 24th, 2025, a date that will forever be burned into the memory of everyone connected to this case, Deborah Newton was arrested. She was outside in the retirement community where she lived, walking her dog, just an ordinary morning, until it wasn't. Law enforcement moved in. Deborah was taken into custody on charges of felony custodial interference, and Michelle, the woman who had always believed she was someone else, was about to have a conversation that would rewrite her entire understanding of who she was. We don't know exactly what was said in that first conversation. We don't know if investigators sat across from Michelle at a table, or if they came to her door, or if they pulled her aside somewhere quiet. These details have been kept private out of respect for her. What we do know is the essence of it. Law enforcement told her that the name she had grown up with was not her real name, that her past, as she knew it, was not her real past, that somewhere in Louisville, Kentucky, a man named Joseph Newton had spent 42 years waiting for her to come home. And we know what she did next. She called him herself. Think about that for a moment. In the immediate aftermath of the most disorienting, earth-shattering revelation of her life, this woman picked up the phone and called the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office. She confirmed who she was. She began the process of reconnecting with a father she had never known she had. That takes courage, extraordinary courage, the kind that most of us will never be tested to find. Because it would have been so much easier to say no, to say this was a mistake, to retreat back into the only life she had ever known, even if that life was built on lies. The truth that law enforcement was offering her was terrifying. It meant that everything was different than she had believed. But she took the call. She accepted the truth, and she reached across 42 years of absence toward a father she had never known. When Joseph Newton finally held his daughter for the first time since 1983, he said something that I want you to sit with for a moment. He said, "I cannot put into words what it felt like to hold her in my arms. It was like she was being born again. Like she was being born again." This man had spent 42 years with a Michelle-shaped hole in his life, 42 years of birthdays that passed without a cake shared between them, 42 years of Christmases and Easters and ordinary Tuesday evenings that he spent wondering where she was, whether she was safe, whether she was happy, whether she ever thought about the father she had been taken from. And now she was here, older, different, a grown woman with her own history, her own personality, her own life. Not the 3-year-old he remembered, not the child in the photographs he had kept all these years, but still his, still against all odds, his daughter. For Michelle, this reunion must have been equally overwhelming, perhaps even more so in different ways. She was meeting a man who was her father, a man she had never known, a man whose existence had been hidden from her by the very person who's supposed to love and protect her. How do you begin to build a relationship with someone you've never met, who is also somehow the most important person in your life? You start from where you are. You take it one conversation at a time, and you trust that the love between a parent and a child doesn't require 42 years of shared memories to be real. And then there is Deborah. It would be easy and perhaps tempting to make her a simple villain, a monster, someone without conscience or remorse who coldly and deliberately destroyed her daughter's life and her ex-husband's sanity for no reason other than spite. The truth, as it almost always is more complicated. We don't know exactly what drove Deborah to make the choices she made. We don't know what was happening inside that marriage, inside that house in Louisville in the months before she ran. We don't know what fears, real or imagined, pushed her to take such an extreme and irreversible step. What we do know is the result of those choices. She took a 3-year-old child away from her father. She denied that child the right to know her own identity for over 4 decades. She denied Joseph Newton the right to watch his daughter grow up. And she lived under a false identity for more than 40 years, presumably carrying the weight of that secret every single day. There is a certain irony in the fact that Deborah was found in a retirement community, a place where people go to rest, to slow down, to reflect on the lives they've lived. Did she ever lie awake at night thinking about what she had done? Did she ever wonder if Michelle would one day find out? Did she ever pick up the phone, come close to calling Joseph, and then put it back down? We may never know the answers to those questions. What we do know is that under Kentucky law, felony custodial interference has no statute of limitations. This means that no matter how many years pass, the charge cannot expire. You cannot simply wait out justice. And now, at an age when most people are thinking about grandchildren and garden walks and quiet evenings, Deborah Newton must face the legal consequences of a decision she made in 1983. She has appeared in court. The proceedings are ongoing. And whatever the outcome, the damage she caused cannot be undone. There is a deeper question at the heart of this story, one that goes beyond the legal charges, beyond the police work, beyond even the reunion between a father and daughter. It is the question of identity itself. Who are we, really? Are we the names on our birth certificates, the stories our parents tell us, the memories we have accumulated since childhood? Or are we something more fundamental than any of that, something that exists underneath the names and the stories and the photographs in old family albums? Michelle Marie Newton lived for over 40 years as someone else. She built a life. She had experiences, relationships, a sense of self. And then, in a single morning, she learned that the foundation of everything she believed about herself was false. Most of us will never experience anything close to that. But in a smaller way, many of us have had moments where we discovered that something we believed to be true about ourselves, about our families, about our pasts, was not what we thought. And we know how disorienting that can feel, even when the stakes are much smaller. Imagine that disorientation multiplied 1,000-fold. Imagine every story your mother ever told you being potentially a lie. Imagine realizing that your name, the thing people have called you your entire life, the word that means you, was invented. And yet, and this is what I find most remarkable about Michelle, she didn't collapse. She didn't disappear into denial. She made the phone call. She took the step toward truth, even knowing how painful that truth was. That speaks to a strength of character that no false name, no manufactured past, and no 42 years of deception could extinguish. This case also forces us to have an honest conversation about the systems that were supposed to protect Michelle and the ways those systems fell short. In 2000, the case was dismissed. In 2005, Michelle's name was removed from the National Missing Children's databases. Think about what that means for a moment. A child who was kidnapped, whose father never stopped looking for her, was effectively erased from the system designed to find her. Why did this happen? Partly because of resource limitations. Law enforcement agencies are stretched thin, and cold cases that show no new activity sometimes get deprioritized. Partly because the technology available in 2000 or 2005 was not what it is today, and partly because in parental abduction cases, the assumption sometimes creeps in that things have probably worked themselves out, that the child is probably fine, probably happy, probably with a parent who loves them. But that assumption is dangerous because the child in a parental abduction case may indeed be physically safe, but they are living a lie. They are being denied the truth of their own existence. And as Michelle's case proves, that denial can stretch across an entire lifetime if no one keeps pushing. The reactivation of the case in 2016, thanks to a family member who refused to let it die, was the turning point. It is a reminder that the persistence of ordinary people, the refusal to accept that some cases are simply closed, can be the difference between a family that is reunited and one that spends forever wondering. The Crime Stoppers tip, the DNA technology, the careful investigation that followed, these are the tools that ultimately brought Michelle home. Modern forensic science can do things that would have seemed like science fiction in 1983. A DNA match at 99.9% is not a theory, it is not a guess, it is a fact. And facts, no matter how long they take to surface, have a way of rising to the top. Michelle Newton's case is remarkable because it ended with a reunion, because the DNA matched, because someone made a call, because after 42 years, a father and daughter found each other. But for every Michelle Newton, there are hundreds, perhaps thousands of children who are never found. Children who grew up like Michelle under false identities, in towns where no one knew who they really were, raised by parents who chose to disappear rather than face custody arrangements they didn't want. These are the invisible victims of parental abduction. They are not the victims you hear about most often in true crime stories. They are rarely found in shallow graves or riverbanks. They are alive. They are going to school and falling in love and building careers. They are living full lives, but lives constructed on a false foundation. In the United States alone, tens of thousands of parental abduction cases are reported every year. Most are resolved relatively quickly, but some are not. Some children spend years or entire lifetimes separated from the parent who was left behind. And the parent who was left behind is also a victim, often overlooked, often reduced to a footnote in a case that the system has moved on from. Joseph Newton spent 42 years as that footnote, a father whose child existed nowhere in the official databases, a man whose grief was, in the eyes of the law, essentially resolved. It was not resolved. It is never resolved, not until the child comes home. There are details in this case that I keep coming back to, small things that somehow feel more enormous than the big facts. Deborah Newton was walking her dog when she was arrested. Think about that image. A woman in her 60s or 70s, a retirement community in Florida, probably palm trees, probably sunshine, probably the quiet soundtrack of a neighborhood that has seen better days and is grateful for the peace. She is outside with her dog on a leash. It is a Tuesday morning, or a Monday, or a Thursday, some ordinary day of the week. She is thinking about breakfast maybe, or about the weather, or about nothing at all. And then, law enforcement arrives. For 42 years, she had been waiting for this. Maybe not consciously, maybe she had convinced herself over time that it would never happen, that too much time had passed, that the world had moved on, that she was safe now in her retirement with her new name and her quiet life. But the world had not moved on. Joseph Newton had not moved on. The law had not moved on. Another detail. Michelle did not know she was a missing person. She had no idea. She had lived her entire life not knowing that somewhere in a county courthouse in Kentucky there was a warrant with her real name on it, that somewhere a father had been fighting for her, that the name she answered to was not the name she was given at birth. This is not a small thing. To be 40 years old or more and to discover that your entire sense of self is built on a lie told to you by your mother. There are no words adequate to describe that experience. We can try to imagine it. We cannot fully feel it. And yet, and this is the thing that gives this story its unlikely grace, Michelle chose the truth. She had a choice in that moment when law enforcement told her who she really was. She could have walked away, could have said she didn't want to know, could have chosen the comfortable fiction over the painful reality. She chose the reality. She made the call. She went home. Before we close this story, I want to speak directly to you. Whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever brought you to listen to this today. Because this case is not just about Michelle Newton or Joseph Newton or even Deborah. It is about all of us, about what we value, about the systems we trust and the ways those systems can fail, about the relentless nature of truth and the impossibility of running from it forever. First, if you have any information about a missing child, make the call. It doesn't matter if you think the tip is small. It doesn't matter if you're not certain. One phone call to Crime Stoppers, one moment of deciding to act rather than ignore, changed everything in this case. One tip. 42 years of searching ended by one person who decided to pick up the phone. Second, if you are separated from a child, do not give up. Joseph Newton is proof that persistence matters, that choosing to keep going, even when the system has moved on, even when the case has been dismissed, even when every institutional door seems to be closed, that persistence can be the thing that brings someone home. Do not let them tell you the case is cold. Do not let them remove your child's name from the database without a fight. Be Joseph Newton. Third, if you are someone who was adopted or raised by a single parent, or who has questions about your origins that have never been fully answered, pursue the truth. Modern DNA technology can answer questions that seemed permanently unanswerable a generation ago. The databases exist, the tools exist, the answers may be closer than you think, and they may change your life in ways you cannot currently imagine. Fourth, if you know something about a family secret, if there's a child in your life whose story doesn't quite add up, if you've heard things over the years that made you uneasy, please take that unease seriously. You might be the only person in a position to change the outcome of someone's story. And finally, if you are Michelle Newton or someone like her who has recently discovered a truth about yourself that has shattered everything you thought you knew, be gentle with yourself. The disorientation you feel is real. The grief is real. The anger is real. But so is the possibility of healing. You are not defined by the lies that were told to you. You are not the false name you were given. You are whoever you choose to become, and now, at last, you have the chance to choose it with full knowledge of who you really are. That is not nothing. That is actually everything.
Michelle Marie Newton was 3 years old when she disappeared. She was 45 when she came home. In between those two moments, in the vast, complicated, often beautiful, often painful life she lived in the years she was away, she became a person, a full, complete, real person. None of that is erased by the truth. None of her experiences, her relationships, her memories, her sense of self, none of it simply ceases to matter because she now knows her real name. But she also knows now that there was always something waiting for her. A father who never stopped, a family that kept the light on, a truth that refused, despite every attempt to bury it, to stay buried. 42 years is a long time. It is most of a lifetime. It is grandchildren missed and parents aged and moments that can never be recovered. But it is not forever. And in the end, forever was not how long it took. It took 42 years, one DNA test, one phone call, and one woman brave enough to walk through the door of the truth, even when everything inside her must have been screaming to turn back. Michelle Marie Newton is home, and somewhere in Louisville, Kentucky, a father who promised he would never stop looking is finally at last allowed to rest.